After 11 years of building a critical financial system, I was unfairly fired. Weeks later, the company started to crumble due to a failed modernization, and they called me back to fix mistakes I never made. Let me start from the beginning. I settled into a small coffee shop across from Netflix's Manhattan headquarters, cradling a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea in my hands as I sat by the window. The winter sunlight bounced off the tower's glass exterior. It fractured into shards of color from the flashing red and blue lights of police cars, mixing with the dull drone of news vans parked along the curb. Through the window, I watched employees drift in and out with drawn faces, shoulders slumped, phones glued to their ears. From where I sat, the building that once felt like a second home now looked more like a wounded giant struggling to stand. My phone buzzed softly against the table, and when I glanced down, the subject line in bold red letters caught my eye: emergency outage, all billing suspended. For a moment, I just stared, those words hanging like a headline from a world I'd already walked away from. My chest tightened, but not from shock, rather from a cold, bitter satisfaction that this was inevitable. I'd known this day was coming ever since they showed me the door. 7 weeks earlier, I had stood in a carpeted HR office on the 32nd floor, a cardboard box at my feet. Sitting across from me was Lucas Dalford, the CEO's 28-year-old son, smirking with the confident ease of someone who'd never written a single line of production code. "Madison," he said, leaning back, using his father's name like a shield, "we've reviewed your modules. Frankly, this bad code is holding the company back. It's time to modernize." Bad code, that's how he summed up 11 years of late nights. I had spent those years perfecting the currency normalization system that quietly handled several $billion moving between Tokyo, London, and New York, without a single major failure. My team and I were the invisible backbone of NetFlight, the reason clients trusted us with their finances without question. But to Lucas, it was just outdated clutter blocking his vision. I remember gripping the edge of my chair, forcing myself to stay calm as HR slid the severance papers across the desk. I signed without a word, knowing any protest would be pointless. On the elevator ride down, I whispered to myself that they'd just unplugged the very thing keeping the company alive. Back in the coffee shop, I closed the email and took another slow sip of tea. Outside, sirens mingled with distant taxi horns. The city kept moving, oblivious to the chaos brewing behind that glass tower. I leaned back, watching the first cracks form in their empire, thinking about that moment Lucas first smiled at me across the sterile HR desk. I knew the real storm was only just starting. The memory of that all-hands meeting was etched as clearly as the Manhattan skyline outside our 22nd floor conference room. Sunlight poured in through the glass walls, reflecting off the Times Square billboards, while the engineering team sat stiffly in a semicircle around the table. Most of us had been with NetFlight for years. Some had even gone gray here. We were the quiet gears behind several $1 billion flowing safely through our clients' systems. And there was Lucas Dalford, standing at the front, his designer suit crisp, his grin sharp, holding a sleek tablet like a royal scepter. "NetFlight is entering a new era," he announced, his voice bouncing off the glass. A slide appeared on the wall behind him: 91-day system modernization. Neon blue arrows promised progress, diagrams of clean microservices blossomed like flowers. He clicked through a rapid-fire stream of buzzwords: CI, CD pipelines, AI code analysis, serverless architecture, his voice growing more excited with each term. Then came the twist. "To speed this up," he said, pausing for effect, "I've signed a contract with Refactor AI. Their proprietary engine will automatically clean and optimize our legacy code, removing the inefficiencies that hold us back." He looked so proud that a few new hires even clapped. I raised my hand. "Lucas, our legacy system isn't just code, it's the company's heartbeat. It handles 16 currencies, each with unique decimals and regulatory quirks. Japan doesn't use decimals, and parts of Europe swap commas and periods. One small misinterpretation could send millions to the wrong account. That complexity isn't inefficiency, it's protection." He tilted his head, smirking with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never seen a real system fail. Madison, if it can't be explained on a slide, it's bad code. The future doesn't have room for spaghetti like that. A few engineers shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. The weight of his last name pressed down like a closing door. I lowered my hand and leaned back, letting his neon arrows flicker past, each one another nail in a coffin he couldn't see. By the time the meeting ended, I knew the countdown to disaster was already ticking. That night, the office was nearly silent except for the HVAC's hum and a distant siren wailing from the streets below. The skyline shimmered on the glass walls, a reminder that New York never truly sleeps. My career here, however, had just been put to rest. HR had delivered the news with the same polite detachment I'd seen in dozens of layoffs over the years. A folder slid across the table, 5-month severance, extended health benefits, and the usual NDA and non-disparagement clause. I signed without hesitation. Words wouldn't change the decision. Lucas's last name had already made it irreversible. Back at my desk, I opened the drawers that had once held my life. A faded photo of my first team in that scrappy Brooklyn warehouse. A coffee mug chipped on one side from too many late nights. 11 years of loyalty and invisible labor reduced to a cardboard box that felt far too light before logging out for the last time. I opened my private notes folder. It wasn't company property. Just my own documentation, diagrams of the currency normalization bridge, explanations of every strange edge case, and the hidden logic behind messy code. It was the map of landmines that only I could read. Quietly, I copied it to an encrypted drive and deleted the originals from the shared space. I had no interest in revenge, but I wasn't going to leave my knowledge behind for people who thought a slide deck could replace experience. On my way out, I paused by the server room behind that door. The code I had written was still running, moving several $billion across 16 currencies without a hiccup. I placed my hand on the cold metal handle and whispered to myself, "They don't even realize they just pulled the pin." I rode the elevator down to the lobby with my small box and walked into the crisp night air. The city buzzed around me, oblivious, but I could already feel the quiet tremor of what was coming. Within weeks, the cracks would spread and the first signs of collapse would appear for everyone to see. 20 days after I walked out of NetFlight for the last time, I found myself strolling through Flushing Meadows Park. The February air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of roasted nuts from a nearby cart. I wrapped my fingers around a paper cup of coffee, letting the warmth seep into my palms, and stopped by the edge of the lake, where the city skyline shimmered in the distance. My phone buzzed with a notification. Out of habit, I opened Reddit, and there it was, a thread exploding in our software gore. NetFlight charged me $0. 02 for a $975 subscription. The screenshot showed a pristine invoice with a single cent in the total. Blow it. Another user chimed in, "Lucky you. I just got billed $9,800 for a $120 service." Support is silent. Dozens of replies poured in, half in panic, half in disbelief. I scrolled further, finding the same chaos mirrored on Twitter, screenshots, angry tags, and memes of flaming dollar bills. Some joked about free subscriptions for life. Others swore they were contacting lawyers. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the bitter warmth spread through me. It wasn't joy. Not exactly. More like a quiet recognition that gravity always wins. The logic was simple. My messy currency normalization bridge had been the invisible glue holding 16 currencies together. Japanese yen with no decimals. European transactions with commas where Americans used periods. Edge cases where banks process cents differently, depending on the day of the month. It was ugly code because the world itself was ugly. Clean slides and AI refactors couldn't change that. By now, their gleaming microservices were misreading decimals, flipping digits, and producing numbers that belonged in casino jackpots rather than financial ledgers. And the best part, or worst, depending on how you looked at it, was that I hadn't touched a thing. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't planted a bug or written a single malicious line. All I'd done was leave and let arrogance do the rest. A gust of wind rippled the lake, and I watched a gold dip low over the water, somewhere across the river. Alarms were blaring, phones were ringing, and I knew the first real calls of desperation would come soon, 4 days later. I was in Midtown, walking past the bright digital tickers that wrapped around the buildings like electric ribbons. Between the flashing ads and stock prices, one headline repeated in bold red: Netflix stock plunges 38%. Below it, a financial network scrolled an endless loop of sound bites. A global billing chaos at Netflix systems. One anchor said, "As footage of the glass tower I once worked in filled the screen," a second voice added, "For enterprise clients have already terminated their contracts and 6 more have suspended service until the errors are resolved." I stopped for a moment on the sidewalk, letting the city noise blur into a distant hum. The company I had poured 11 years into was unraveling faster than I'd even predicted. The elegant, invisible engine I had built had been replaced with hollow promises, and now the entire financial world was watching it fail. That night, I opened my laptop and logged into LinkedIn, a habit I hadn't indulged since leaving. My inbox was stacked with messages. Most were from recruiters sensing opportunity, but a few were from familiar names. One message stood out among the flood, a note from Isabella Nathan, a junior developer who had once given me a polite, nervous smile during Lucas's all-hands presentation. Her words hit me like a gut punch. "Madison, I think we completely broke it. Nobody around here seems to understand decimals anymore. The system's charging random amounts, and every attempt to fix one thing just breaks something else. I wish we'd listened to you." I leaned back, eyes fixed on the blinking cursor on my screen, but I didn't respond. What could I say that reality hadn't already made painfully clear? Moments later, another alert popped up, news that yet another client had gone public with their anger. The shareholders were starting to demand answers, calling for heads to roll. I shut my laptop, setting it aside as the faint glow of the city's lights flickered across my living room walls. The air in the room felt heavy, not with regret or guilt, but with a cold, crushing sense of inevitability. I didn't have to lift a finger. Their own hubris was tearing everything down for me. Now all that was left was to wait for the inevitable call. That night, I sat alone on my couch, the city's glow streaming through my windows. The television was muted, but its red alert banner shouted the story: net flight down 50%, clients jumping ship. A small video box showed a reporter standing outside the very glass tower I used to enter every morning, the same revolving doors I'd walked through clutching a cardboard box not long ago. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew exactly who it was before I even picked up. "Madison Riley?" I answered. A brief pause, then a voice heavy with exhaustion. "Nathan Brooks, the CFO. Madison, we need you. We're desperate. Name your price." I let the silence stretch a little longer, watching the muted chaos flickering on the screen. Finally, I said, 6 times what I made before. "Paid monthly?" "Upfront," he asked. No argument came back. "It's a deal. You'll have full control, no interference from management." Another pause, then a tired sigh. "Lucas Downford is out. He won't be touching the code or even sending messages." That silence between us felt heavy. I pictured Lucas, somewhere else, rubbing the bridge of his nose in frustration. "All right, I'll take care of it. One condition: any code I write stays mine. Netflix gets a perpetual license, but the intellectual property belongs to me." "That's unusual," he said. "Then again, losing half your market value in just 21 weeks isn't exactly normal either. Especially when it happens because someone dismantled the system that was keeping you alive." I replied calmly. The line went quiet before he finally sighed. "Fine. Whatever it takes. Send me the contract tonight." "I'll come into the office tomorrow," I told him, "but I won't write a single line until it's signed." I ended the call and set the phone down, letting the silence wrap around me as the TV flickered with images of furious shareholders and endless headlines. I knew that when tomorrow came, I'd walk back into that building, but on my own terms this time. The next morning, I stepped through the revolving doors of Netflix headquarters, and, for the first time, nobody stopped me. Security gave me a nod. They were already briefed about my return, and I rode the elevator up in silence. The building felt different now. Where it once exuded sleek confidence, now it buzzed with frantic energy, desperate to survive. On the 22nd floor, I passed conference rooms converted into makeshift dorms, blankets draped over chairs, empty energy drink cans lined windowsills, and the stale smell of coffee and exhaustion hung thick in the air. A few engineers glanced up as I entered the war room. Their eyes were bloodshot from sleepless nights. Isabella stood among them, pale and drawn, giving me a small, tentative nod. The weight of regret hung heavy in her posture. Without wasting a second, I dropped my bag and began. "This is exactly why the old system worked," I said, projecting a diagram of the currency normalization bridge onto the screen. 16 currencies, each with its own decimal rules. Banking systems that disagree on how to handle cents. Regulations that shift mid-year. None of it's pretty, and neither was the code. Heads leaned forward, pen scratched as I spoke. I walked them through the logic, the way a Japanese yen transaction with no decimals could break a European system expecting them, how a simple misplaced comma could turn 100 into 10,000, and how years of exceptions had created a living roadmap for survival. When I looked up, Isabella's eyes met mine, filled with shame but also relief. She was finally starting to understand that messy code meant code tested and proven by the real world. I talked for hours, laying bare the invisible architecture that had held them steady for over a decade. When I finally paused, the room was silent, the engineers absorbing truths their sleek slides and fancy refactoring tools had never revealed. I grabbed a marker and turned to the whiteboard, ready to map out the steps to rebuild what arrogance had torn apart. The war room hummed with nervous energy as I settled into a borrowed workstation, dual monitors lighting up the half-erased diagrams on the whiteboard. Outside the glass wall, the vibrant lights of Times Square pulsed like a restless heartbeat, a constant reminder that the city kept moving even as NetFlight teetered on the brink. I opened the staging environment and began painstakingly reconstructing the currency normalization bridge from the ground up. My fingers moved with a quiet confidence born from years of muscle memory and deep understanding of the system's quirks. Line by line, I crafted functions to manage decimal placements, regulatory exceptions, and those maddening regional edge cases that no AI could ever predict. Behind me, the engineers hovered quietly, watching over my shoulder like surgeons observing a delicate operation. I talked them through each section, carefully annotating the code with detailed comments. "This block handles cross-border yen transactions," I explained, pointing to a nested condition. "Without it, a $110 payment could turn into $9,500 or just a few cents, depending on the receiving bank's rules." 3 hours later, I pushed the first test build to staging. "Run the test transactions," I instructed. The room collectively held its breath as Isabella started the batch, processing each one carefully. The results were flawless, perfect amounts across all 16 currencies. "It worked," she whispered, then louder, "It worked." A wave of exhausted engineers erupted into cheers, clapping and high-fiving like people who'd been living on adrenaline and caffeine for weeks. I nodded quietly, saving the documentation and uploading my comments to the private archive I now controlled. Relief was a luxury reserved for those who hadn't seen this coming. The room fell silent as the door opened. Owen Dalford stepped inside, silver hair neatly combed, but his face tight with exhaustion and humiliation. His eyes scanned the team before resting on me. "Ms. Riley," he said, voice low but firm, a word. "Alone." I logged out, rose, and followed him down the hall to a small glass office. The murmur of engineers and the distant hum of Times Square faded behind the closed door. Owen stood with hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city like he was searching for the right words. "Nathan has briefed me," he began, voice steady, "about the outage, your contributions, and the terms you negotiated." I leaned against the table, letting the silence stretch. "My son," he continued carefully, "made a grave mistake. He removed critical parts of your system without understanding their purpose. I gave him too much freedom." He took a slow breath. "I want to offer you a permanent senior executive role, with appropriate authority and compensation. This company needs you." It would have been easy to say yes. I had spent years roaming these halls, safeguarding invisible systems that everyone depended on but no one acknowledged. Yet the memory of Lucas's smug grin in that all-hands meeting and the cold HR voice reading from the severance script still lingered. "I'm not coming back as an employee," I said firmly. His brows knitted. "You've proven your worth." "Why refuse?" "Because the problem isn't just a line of code," I replied evenly. "It's a culture that values buzzwords over reality, that hands power to family over expertise, and that discards the very people holding it all together just because their work isn't flashy." Owen's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I stepped away from the table, meeting his gaze. "Next time, ask why the code exists before erasing it." The words hung heavy, like a judge's gavel. He nodded once. "Lucas is moving to business development, effective immediately. No technical authority." I felt no triumph, just a steady lift of a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. My work had spoken for itself as I left the glass office. Engineers glanced up, and Isabella's eyes met mine with a quiet gratitude. I walked past them, my steps lighter than they'd been in years, ready to leave that building on my own terms. Back in my Queen's apartment, the last sunset glow stretched across the skyline as city lights flickered on, each window a tiny spark against the quiet of my living room. I slipped off my coat, set my phone on the counter, and let the stillness settle. For the first time in weeks, my chest felt unburdened, free from tension. I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the F train snake through the city like a silver thread. My victory hadn't come from sabotage or bitterness. It came from the simple truth that I could walk away richer, freer, and with my value recognized in ways a paycheck never could. I had transformed years of unseen labor into leverage, and finally, I had chosen myself. In the days that followed, I began sketching a new path. Though I'd received consulting offers before, now I truly understood the power I held, knowledge that couldn't be bought in a slide deck or duplicated by any AI. I drafted plans for a practice dedicated to helping companies preserve institutional memory, protect critical systems, and avoid the arrogance that nearly sank NetFlight. One evening, while reviewing my notes, an email popped up from Isabella. "I'll never dismiss messy code again. Thank you for showing me what really keeps a system alive." I smiled softly, warmth spreading through me, unrelated to the wine. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing my legacy wasn't just a fixed system or a lucrative contract. It was the seed of understanding planted in someone who would carry it forward. Turning back to the window, the skyline shimmered in the distance, and I whispered to the empty room, "Some code looks messy. Some people seem invisible. But they're the ones holding the world together until someone learns the hard way."